I call this meeting to order, the 38th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. We are, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we are continuing our study on measures to enhance credit availability and the stability of the Canadian financial system. We are focusing on Nortel. We have two panels here this morning, colleagues. We have, first of all, a panel with the President and CEO, Mike Zaporowski, and Council Derek Tay, from 9 to 10 a.m. and then from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. we have persons representing pensioners for an hour as well. I'll just remind colleagues and all those interested in these hearings, the committee did adopt a motion on June the 2nd dealing with employment stock options, Mr. Mulcair's motion, which there will be a report back to the committee by the Finance Department in July, I believe. This is to deal with our study on credit availability and dealing with the pension issue, which is a subset of that study. So we have for the first hour, we have the President and CEO, and Mr. Zaporowski, I understand you have a 10-minute opening statement, and then we will go to questions from members. So please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, honourable members. I do appreciate the importance of the request to be here with you today. I do take your own inquiry very seriously, and I do look forward to a very transparent and open discussion. I do have about 10 minutes of opening comments. I'll try to be as transparent and as direct as I know how, and I think we'll try to address most of the issues, as I do look forward to a quite robust discussion after that. But before we get into the details, let me say that a day does not go by that I do not think about the implications of our difficult decisions which we have had on both former and current employees. Nortel is a company with a very storied history, and I take the history very seriously. When I came to Nortel 3.5 years ago, many people said it was a mission impossible. But I and many within Nortel believed that Nortel was a great global icon that could, in fact, be fixed. We did set a very ambitious agenda for the company, and together the employees made a tremendous progress on multiple fronts. We fixed our accounting and legal issues, we improved quality of our products, we improved our cost structure, but most important, and this is specifically for the Ottawa-based center, which is R&D, we went from going from legacy to new technologies. We've made significant investments, multi-$100 million of investments in technologies like fourth-generation wireless, 4,800 gig optical unified communications. And just a year ago, at a investor meeting in Toronto, we were very proud, we had lots of enthusiasm that discussing how we had planned to finish the transformation and the real prospects for sustainable growth going forward. Then, frankly, we hit a wall. And the global financial crisis and recession compounded our challenges and impacted our ability to complete the transformation. January 14th, we filed for protection from our creditors in Canada, the U.S., and parts of Europe. We did not take this decision lightly, but there was unanimous authorization by our board after thorough consultation with advisors and extensive consideration of the alternatives. Nortel today is not completely under the sole control of Nortel management and the board. And now we have an active involvement of the court-appointed monitor in several creditor committees. It is not where we want to be. I'll be the first one to say that. But rest assured, we are pursuing maximize the value for Nortel and try to preserve as many jobs as possible with the same passion that I had when I came to this company 3.5 years ago. We are trying to run the company based on three principles. First in this is not to lose the customer. It's very important to give confidence to our customers that we are here to stay in business. Second, to operate in a mode of a reality, see the world the way it is, not the way we wish it was, but in the same world, to be working with a level of optimism. And third, the time is of the essence. Nortel employees have done a tremendous job under very challenging conditions, stabilizing our business and delivering outstanding service to our customers. And again, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the support not only of our employees but customers and suppliers during this period. Let me move on to the matters which we're here today, and I do realize the sensitivity of those, and this is in the compensation decisions. One thing that Nortel confirmed right from day one, that we will continue to fulfill all obligations to existing employees. And this is a combination of continuing to pay base wages. We did freeze the salaries for 2009, but also allowing vacation to accrue, and we continue to pay medical and health care benefits. In the time of filing, we also believe it was very important to continue our annual incentive plan and also to have some sort of a retention program for the most important employees. And I'll just make a couple of comments here on both of those. First of all, the annual incentive plan. And it's available to virtually all Nortel employees, 95% plus. It's an ordinary course of business incentive, and it has been in place for many years. It's very much an industry standard. We do view that, the incentive plan, to be very much part of the wages which we pay to our employees. The decision regarding the 2009 annual incentive plan was developed by management with input from Merchant Consulting Group and very active discussions and negotiations with the creditor committees and the monitor. And it's based on achieving three very important targets. One is to maintain the revenues of the business. Second, for us to be able to fulfill very high customer performance matrix. And the third one is to preserve the cash balance. In addition, since we filed, all equity-based compensation programs have been terminated. As you may know, and also all prior equity awards have been canceled, so therefore no longer have the ability to compensate our employees with equity awards, which traditionally make a very significant part of the compensation for management and the employees. Now to the program, to the retention programs. It is pretty warm here. But let me just make a couple comments on the employee incentive program and the overall employee retention program. In this company situation, and in a highly competitive industry, retaining key employees and preventing unwanted levels of attrition is critical to preserve the value and to maximize assets for company stakeholders. We have two programs. One is a key employee retention program, and this is for 900 non-executive employees. So this is a rather large number of employees, unprecedented, but we thought this was very consistent with the significant challenges facing the company. In addition, for 92 of the more senior employees, we have our key employee incentive program, and this program is based on achieving very specific incentive targets. Executives who are participating in this program are required to waive their rights under previous change of control program, and I personally chose not to participate in the key employee incentive nor the key employee retention program. And also my change of control provisions, I have waived the rights to those as well. With respect to severance, I mean, this is the most difficult issue. It's weighted on me greatly. Most importantly, the decision not to pay severance was not taken lightly. I mean, we have a great level of appreciation for the employees. They're highly skilled, and frankly, although I'm with the company only 3.5 years, I felt as a Nortel employee from the day I joined the company. However, in light of the economic reality of the company's constrained cash resources, particularly in Canada, and the fact that in the legal environment, severance payments have the equal weighing with all other provisions for other creditors, we did not have a choice but to follow the legal jurisdiction. And this was an extremely difficult decision. It was not taken lightly by management or the board of directors. And again, it was made after extensive consultation with financial advisors and the monitor. Let me move on to the pension-related matters. I do think it's important to summarize that all monies that Canadian registered pension plans belong to the plans themselves. They're not available to the company or to the creditors. We'll continue to make contributions, both regular and special contributions, to the pension plans, and we continue to pay payments to our employees on a scheduled basis. I know there has been lots of discussion in the press with respect to reducing the community value paid to employees who are getting out of the plans. Prior to filing, Nortel had said we've been paying commuted values at 100% based on exception to legislation. But starting in January 2009, we reduced the commuted value to approximately 86%, which was based on the estimated deficits shown in the last filed valuations of December 31st, 2006. Unfortunately, since the last filed valuations, the deficits have grown as a result of the well-reported declines in the equity markets. And we consulted with actuarial advisors and believe that the deficit is currently closer to 69%. We had asked for approval to go to 69%. This was approved. But I do think it's very important to highlight that the reduction was not designed to prejudice anyone, but rather meant to ensure equal treatment of members and former members. Let me just wrap up on two last things. My compensation, I do realize this is a very visible and explosive. But first of all, for all the executives, myself included, we do try to follow a 50th percentile of the market for executives in the high-tech industry. For executives, particularly at higher levels, most of the elements of the compensation program are at risk, meaning they're linked to either individual corporate performance as well as to the stock price. For example, 88% of my compensation in 2008 was based at risk. There's a significant difference between what's reported as compensation on the proxy statements versus the actual amounts received. For example, in 2009, the cash compensation was $1.29 million, which was 12% of the total intended compensation for that year. No bonuses were paid in 2008. And as I had indicated, we have canceled all equity awards, both historical, and we're not giving any equity awards in 2009. There's also been comments on the pension benefit. It is based on 5 years, for me, based on 5 years of active employment. I've been with the company for 3.5 years. In assuming I'm with the company for 5 years, that pension payment is not guaranteed. It will be same as all other unfunded pension programs. Will become an unsecured claim. What I can guarantee to you is that what we're driving with the utmost passion and commitment is to optimize the value of Nortel, and at the same time to preserve the most number of jobs in this environment. I cannot overemphasize the strong appreciation for the employees and the empathy for the current situation. And one of the most significant motivations for the management team, for the board and me, as we're working around the clock, is to optimize the value of the Nortel assets. And the better job we do is going to result in a higher recovery value for employees, pensioners, all the other creditors. I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your comments and to your questions. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zafrowski, for your opening statement. We'll go to questions from members. The first round, 7 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Pachetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zafrowski, for appearing. I'm sort of caught in a dilemma because there's a lot of issues that we'd like to cover and I'd like to cover. I'm trying to look at this from a balanced perspective. I requested that you appear because I don't think it's fair to just hear one side of the story. There's 3 sides to every story, as we all know. I would have preferred that you had spoken after we hear the second panel because I think it's in your best interest to speak afterwards. But I'm not going to try and play the part of an employee or former employee. We are conducting a study on the stability of our financial markets, so that's the other angle that I'd like to also address, because how do we prevent this from happening again? So my time is limited. I only have 7 minutes. I
know that certain members around the table Thank you. I know that there are some members who have already decided where they want to take this hearing. They've already taken sides. So this is your opportunity to give us the facts.
Overall global manner, where how do we avoid this from happening again? How could this come to a point where you said it yourself, the 3 criteria of Nortel is to keep their customers How are you going to keep your customers if you can't keep your employees happy or former employees? You want to operate in the real world. Well, we are now operating in the real world. Things have changed. I understand they're changing more rapidly than you'd like to, but you're not government, you're a company. You have to be able to change and change quite rapidly. You can't expect government to change. And yet we've seen that from Obama's statement yesterday. People have to react in a more transparent fashion. Corporations have to report. They have to act in a transparent fashion. You have an obligation. There are people out there that are living in the real world. And the real world meaning if you've promised them after 20 or 30 years of service that they are relying on a paycheck at the end of the month, and whether that paycheck is $100 or $1,000, it's not a question. The question is that if they're relying on it, if they've been promised, and they're at the end of their career, we have to do something about that. There needs to be a protection there. And your third point is time is of the essence. Well, when you're making a couple of $1,000,000, yeah, sure, you've got commitments as well. But when you're only making a couple of $100 and you're trying to find money to pay your mortgage payments and you're trying to find money to pay your credit card payments, what do I say to those people? Because that's what we're going to hear in the next hour. So we can go around and pretend this is not happening. But, you know, that's really the question that we're going to have. Now, I'm not sure how you're going to answer that. You've answered some of the questions in your opening statement. The problem is going to be is that we're going to get a second panel, a second group, and they're going to come up with their version, and then we're going to have a difficulty reconciling both. I'm trying to take a neutral and very transparent view of this, and you're going to get pressure from other MPs where they've already taken sides. And I think the Liberal Party position has always been one of the center, and so we will try and address both. So if I can give you a couple of minutes, but again, we have 7 minutes, so if you can address some of those points.
I mean, first of all, thank you for your question. I do think it's important to understand where the company was back in 2005 and 2006, and I can assure you there's been a level of a commitment, passion from employees, customers, and suppliers to try to rectify lots of the issues which were with the company at that point in time. We really believe we're making the right things. I mean, there's a very significant investment. 60% of our R&D used to be in legacy products. We've completely transformed that. It's only 20%. For the last 3 years, we've made significant investments to really be at the leading edge of the communications.
So in answer to my first question, in order for this not to reoccur, is that the business plans of corporations have to be much better and not make commitments that they can't deliver unless their plan is going to actually materialize?
I mean, that's an excellent point. Where we've tried to be very transparent from day one.
Or are we making promises that we can never keep?
We've tried from day one to articulate the challenges for the company are rather significant. We also had very significant assets. Tried to articulate what are we trying to do to restore a formerly great company. We really thought we were there middle of last year. Number of us. I mean, the board members personally invested amounts to buy Nortel stock. I've been in business for 34 years. I've never bought a share from a company. Used to be equity programs. I mean, a year ago, we put $500,000, including my 3 boys, put some of their college savings in there. So first of all, we really believed what we're saying. Now, you can look back and you can criticize some of those decisions, but there's not a lack of commitment, passion in making the investments for the future. When the world changed upside down, then we were very transparent internally, made a painful decision, and even at this point in time, particularly in the pension programs. I mean, they are not touchable, if you will, by the company or the creditors. We'll continue to make all payments, including special payments in the program. And the reason we're trying to optimize the value.
We can almost say, thank God, that those pension payments are not touchable, but the problem is the deficit or the lack of money. One of the other points.
1 minute, Mr. Pachetti.
Yeah, sorry. One of the other points, and this is, you just stated in your opening comments that you stopped to pay severance, and it was just, how did you come to that conclusion? How did you just all of a sudden realize, well, maybe we should stop paying severance? Because that goes back to the way Nortel treats its employees, former employees. You're going to have a difficulty keeping your current employees if that's how you treat your former employees, I would think. So
I fully agree with that statement, Mr. Take, and confirm the very heated discussions we had what's possible. At times you want to do something that simply the circumstances do not allow. The facts of life, as painful as for me to understand and finally accept.
Because, and I'm just going to wrap it up there, because you're going to get questions from the other members, and I may get a chance again, but it's just because then you're going to have to rationalize why, in turn, and there's rumors from amounts of anywhere from $7.3 million to $23 million being paid to
just very brief
on bonuses. So you did have an opportunity to make a choice.
Thank you, Mr. Pachetti. Just a brief response, sir.
I mean, the annual incentive plan is a part of wages. We continue to make the payment. We do have a retention plan in place for 980 employees, a significant number which we thought was absolutely imperative to stabilize the company and to actually give us the best chance to increase the value which will be available for all stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. We'll go Monsieur Laforêt for 7 minutes.
Mr. Laforêt, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Zafirovsky. I paid attention to a few comments that you made earlier and that really I found quite striking. They surprised me. You said that you have the support of your employees. I can tell you that I find that rather odd. I find it rather odd that you can make such an assertion. How can employees support you when they are seeing how former employees and retirees are being treated? There are certain employees who now see their pensions being jeopardized. There are retirees who are only able to draw from a very minimum amount. How can you say such a thing when, on top of that, you have received a bonus of $9.7 million last year? It's appalling, really, to hear such a thing. That's the least we can say. It's rather hot in this room. No, I think it is room, but I think it is hot, but I think you are probably feeling uncomfortable. And I'm not certain that everyone supports you, Mr. Zafirovsky. So, can you tell us exactly how you feel? You claim that you have a lot of compassion for your employees. But set aside compassion, what have you taken in terms of concrete measures as real steps to truly restore the confidence of your employees and former employees? In fact, there are 3,000 employees in Quebec alone. So what are you doing? What kind of action are you taking?
Question. The decision on January 14th was the most painful and agonizing my 34 years in business. It was very hard realization to come to a place when you realize that to continue with the company as is will provide even a greater risk and a potential for a liquidation, which we certainly did not want to take. My comment with respect to the employees was that my appreciation for their work, which has been above and beyond any expectations, the professionalism to keep serving customers. The last 9 months actually were a multi-year high, delivering for our customers and providing stability for the business, which is the best thing which we can do in this environment. The comment on the compensation is that for 2008, the $9 million amount which you mentioned, and obviously for other executives, that was based on stocks and options which today are worthless. As a result of filing for CCAA, that's no longer in place, but it has been a very difficult and agonizing decision. It's been very difficult and agonizing to see what has been happening with our employees. And the only thing I can tell you, sir, is that we're working around the clock with lots of support from lots of support in professional, private, and existing employees to be able to optimize the value for the business, which is the only and the best thing which you can do for current and for former employees.
With respect to what happened, let's talk exclusively about the pension plan. I assume that, given the size of a company like Nortel, there would be rules on prudence and rules on prudential investments. Do you have any sorts of rules or similar rules that state that you can only invest a certain percentage or a maximum of 10 or 15% in risky investments? And that leads me to ask another question. How much did you invest in your commercial products? Because there was only one single rating which rated some of your products to be very, very risky. In fact, DBRS was the only rating agency that gave an evaluation. So what portion of your investments in the pension plan was made up of ABCP, of asset-backed commercial paper?
A couple of comments on our pension plan. For a large corporation, our pension assets have been managed rather conservatively. Now, you can have a different view with a 20/20 hindsight, but 50% of our pension assets were in equities, stock market, and 50% was in fixed income. Most companies of this size, particularly in North America, have a higher percentage in equities. So that's one. We're also currently making all payments to the pension plan, including special payments. Back in 2006, when I arrived, the pension deficit was actually very significant. Through returns to the marketplace and special payments, the deficit was down to well below 1 billion on a global basis. But company with our balance sheet, with the unprecedented decline in the capital markets in the second half of last year and the first part of this year, produced very significant deficits. Again, in terms of looking back, both from our trustees, the boards, we had managed that business in a quite balanced fashion. And I do think you have to admit that the environment over the last couple quarters has been frankly unprecedented.
Okay. 30 seconds, Monsieur Laforêt. 30 seconds.
You have 30 seconds. There were pension plans that performed better, though. There are pension plans in Canada that were able to avoid the losses and setbacks that you yourself experienced. So when you say that, yes, there were good valuations, you have to admit that there were still some mistakes that were made. Can you tell us exactly which mistakes were made?
Just a very quick comment. We have 50% of our pension plan having in equities, 50% in fixed income. For the last 3 years on balance, we have performed pretty well compared to benchmarks. I'll be happy to, and we'll be happy to follow up with more specifics on that.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Cramp, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Zaborowski and Mr. Tay. Obviously, Nortel has a significant impact on this region, many regions across the country. I know certainly I'm from the Belleville-de Quinte region. Nortel has had a long and storied history there, and so I can assure you that I've heard from many, many, many of the retirees, pensioners, and, of course, former executives of Nortel. Now, I think there isn't a person that doesn't realize that around this table that the best pension guarantee that exists, of course, is a successful and profitable company. But also we understand that when difficulties do occur, pension guarantees do fall under the responsibility of the provinces. But that still, people say, well, then the federal government, are you off the hook? And I say, quite frankly, no. We have responsibilities as well. And I think we as federal legislators have a responsibility to provide a regulatory environment that serves the best interests of both corporate and employee groups. So our purpose here today is to listen to the various perspectives to see if we can come forward and deal with potential legislation and or enforcement and or guidance that we could provide that would be of benefit to both groups going forward. Now, as we travel through this difficult period, I personally, though, and I know a number of my colleagues and certainly my constituents from Belleville and many in the Ottawa Capital Region here that I've had direct contact, and I know my colleagues have as well, I do believe more clarity is needed. The rumor mill runs supreme on a little bit of everything, but when people are directly affected personally, we really have to get right to the very bottom of it to make an intelligent decision. So, well, Nortel was seriously reducing or either eliminating, in many cases, pension benefits. I'd like to know 3 or 4 quick questions, and maybe you can just give me a true or false to them, if you'd like, and we can move on rather quickly. But in the current job market, it's a tight job market out there. Do you really believe it was necessary to offer large bonuses simply to retain the people you have, given this market?
Yes.
You do? Fine. Okay. Were any other incentives other than bonuses considered? And if so, what were they?
I mean, I just want to make sure that when we discuss the bonuses, sir, this is part of a compensation program which is very typical in the high-tech industry. Secretary, for example, if he's to make $40,000, typically, if you're in an industrial company, you pay the full $40,000 as a base salary. In the high-tech industry, to provide some variability, you may say pay $36,000, and then 10% is in a quote-unquote annual bonus. I do think it's very important, but that's true for all the employees, that the annual incentive plan is not a bonus per se. That's part of your compensation for a job personally well done.
It's still dollars received, whether it's bonus or whether it's salary. And my consideration is we are not in normal everyday times. We are not in business as usual times. And is it fair to expect, when people are hurting very, very badly, to see other people sort of stand up, and I don't wish to use the words at the trough, because I think that would be unfair. But would I not suggest that there should be when you share the gain, you should also share the pain. So has there been any consideration within the company or discussion that suggested potentially this part of this benefit plan and or bonus plan should be dropped?
So the discussions have been, what can we do to pay severance? We are absolutely convinced that paying the annual incentive plan and the retention is critical to preserve value within Nortel. That's based on any good practice that has happened in this country, many countries all over the world. Discussions were not either or, but what can we do to in fact pay severance to employees? And that's where, with all the arguments, the board, myself, and Mr. Tay can attest to many late-night discussions on it, the view was that per the jurisdictions in Canada, a very specific example, and the fact that severance payments to former employees carry the same weighing as any other liability, the view is that the judge, or for financial perspectives, that request to pay severance will not be approved.
Okay. Well, I noticed on March the 2nd, Nortel, not the individual court, but Nortel filed the motion to court to pay retention bonuses of $7.3 million simply to 8 key senior executives alone, amongst many other what I would call financial programs to administer wages. What portion of that is bonus? What portion of that is considered salary?
For the retention plans in specific for all 900 employees, including the 8 executives you mentioned, that's a very specific retention plan. This is new. That's for this year. It's a very volatile situation to be able to keep, retain, and motivate employees, to be able to stabilize the company, to optimize the value for it. Many things have been foregone, including equity plans, the change of control plans. We've eliminated many benefits, but this is a special plan for 2009 to be able to allow the company to survive. I chose not to be in those.
One minute, Mr. Crown.
I think we can certainly understand the anger and the angst, though, when people are faced with what they what they felt was a very, very positive, predictable future, and they see that dramatically cut and curtailed, and yet they still see a bonus process in place. We understand that you have to offer incentive to try to attract quality people. But there just does appear to be a bit of a contradiction at this particular point where there doesn't appear to be a sense of balance and fairness, and that has been demonstrated by many, many people throughout, obviously, the company. And so I worry about, when I take a look at the
Question?
okay, question. I have a statement from yourself as CEO basically standing up for the code and principles and the code of business conduct that Nortel Canada should. Do you feel you and the company are honoring this code of conduct?
Okay, just very briefly, sir.
I mean, the short answer is yes. When you file for credit protection, that means you have many real liabilities, whether it's to a supplier, to an employee, to a bondholder. And the unfortunate realization at that point in time is that you cannot fulfill all your obligations. That's why you file for creditor protection. So from that perspective, the short answer is yes. And I do want to re-stress the point of making severance payments has been a very painful decision. And really, we did not believe there's any other options but to take the course of action.
Okay, thank you. We'll go, Monsieur Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Zafirowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Zafarowski.
How painful it was for you. These are your exact words. How difficult, how agonizing, and you explained your empathy, all your words. Given that, I would ask if you would be so kind as to stay for the next hour so that you can hear from all these people who are actually suffering the pain that you say that you have.
Order. 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 And ask the crowd to please respect Mr. Mulcair's time.
Ma première question de fond.
My first substantive question is the following. You asked the courts for $45 million to pay bonuses as part of your retention plan. And in answering a question earlier, you said that according to the legal opinion that you had obtained, you didn't need to ask for severance payments because you already knew well ahead of time that the courts would say no. So how could you have known that the courts would have agreed to give you $45 million to pay yourselves and other executives, and yet you knew that they were going to refuse the severance payments?
In bonuses to retain senior employees, and you don't even try to get the money for the severance payments.
The approach internally on continuing to fulfill obligations to existing employees in the retention plan based on studies of companies all over the world, we thought it was absolute minimum requirement. Creditors who have the same expectations as employees, they would like to optimize what the company owes to them, also believed. They were very much in active discussions of what are the right things to do to be able to have the proceeds to be able to fulfill the greatest percentage of previous obligations.
Mr. Zafarowski, are you going to stay for the second hour? Because I have places right here for you and for Mr. Tay. If you'd like to hear from the people, Mr. Pachetti was right. The order was decided by the chair. That's fine. But they are here, and it'll take you 1 hour to hear from them. And I think that would be useful, given the fact that you've described how painful this has been for you. This might be a way for you to expiate some of that pain. And I'm inviting you to stay here for another hour, if that's possible.
I mean, sir, I will consider that. I've spoken to many employees. I still continue to speak to many.
Would you like to
current and
listen to
former
them instead of
employees.
speaking to them? Would you like to listen to them?
The speaking comment was a combination of listening and speaking, but I will consider that. Thank you.
Well, we'd be very, very thankful to you if you did. Now, we're trying to also find out what the actual state of play is here. Is it possible that we've seen you've been on the Hill in recent months since the January filing? Have you been up here on Parliament having any meetings since January?
We've had a number of meetings, November, December, January, and March, correct?
Here on the Hill, have you met with any ministers or spoken with any ministers?
Yes, private discussions, yes.
Yes, well, actually, we get to ask you about them here. Who were those discussions with? Which ministers did you meet? You have to answer.
I mean, we've spoken with a number of them, Mr.
Well, name
Finance,
them.
Industry.
Mr. Clement is
Trade.
industry. Who else have you spoken to? The Prime Minister?
Mr. Flaherty.
Mr. Flaherty?
I've met the Prime Minister as part of industry, but I've not spoken to him specifically with respect to Nortel.
And you have to answer this question. What was the nature of those conversations?
I mean, there was a status of the company, status of the industry.
That's general. I'd like something more specific.
And also any potential areas of collaboration.
Did you talk to them about the fact that if you don't pay severance, people will get employment insurance, and that's a liability for the state as opposed to the company?
I mean, that certainly was one of the items. I was also discussing areas of more substantive, if you will, assistance. But those discussions did not end up in any concrete.
Specifically, what was the nature of your discussion with regard to severance and EI, and with whom?
There was not a specific discussion of pension or severance, but there was a discussion, obviously, the impact on employees. They expected reductions if they were to file, but we did not have a specific discussion of severance.
Did you discuss severance versus EI with Mr. Clement or with Mr. Flaherty?
I said there was not a specific discussion on severance. There was discussions on the overall impact on employees.
Did they offer anything to you with regard to the existing schemes under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act? In other words, was there any attempt by the Canadian government to get involved? I noticed that they're not there at the hearings, but the U.S. government is.
No. We've been very active discussions with the EDC, but we did not come to areas of direct assistance there, no.
On several occasions during your presentation, you talked about increasing the value to be available for all stakeholders. Correct. Do you consider the people in this room, your former employees, to be amongst those stakeholders? Oh,
absolutely. If it did not come clear, okay. Pensioners, current former employees.
But right now, they're in the same position as a distressed bondholder on Wall Street, aren't they? They're relegated to the back of the pack. Has your analysis and the decisions that you've taken been a function, depending on which countries in which you put yourself in bankruptcy protection, has that been a function of what would be available from various states and governments in those different jurisdictions, whether you put yourself into bankruptcy or you tried to make it a going concern? Because if it's protected in bankruptcy, you can do things like pay yourselves $45 million in bonuses, but if it's a going concern, it's going to be under a different light, isn't it?
That's not really true. Yep. But I'll make a comment on the first one. There's no one back of the line.
I think what are you there is. There are secured creditors out there, and the employees are not secured creditors.
There's no secured creditors, sir. So
right now.
There's no one back. This is active, ongoing employees. There's consultants or parties that are serving the various stakeholders, but there's no secured creditors.
30 seconds.
You say that there's no back of the line, but I put it to you again, and I'll end where I started, that the people who are in back of you are in the back of the line because they don't get to ask for $45 million in bonuses. They don't get their severance. They're not getting anything, and they're watching their pensions be whittled away. So I invite you again to spend the next hour of your time listening to these people because they're the ones who are feeling the pain. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. Thank you. I'll just remind members in the audience that it is for members' time for question. I just ask you to please respect that. We'll go to Mr. McCallum, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Zafirovsky, for being here today. I'd just like to associate myself with my colleague from the NDP, and I hope that you will be able to find the time to stay an extra hour to listen to all these people. I think it's quite obvious this is an extremely sad case. I know you say for yourself, and also more so, at least, I would say for the others in this room, but also for Canada. I remember before I came into politics, I worked for the Royal Bank, and at one point Nortel was worth more in terms of market capitalization than the Royal Bank of Canada, and look where it is today. And I've heard from some Nortel people about possibilities of government help, and I'd just like to pursue a little bit Mr. Mulcair's line of questioning. In terms of your questions or your discussions with whether Mr. Flaherty, Mr. Clement, Mr. Harper, or any other government officials, Did you propose to them some sort of a plan for the government to provide help so that Nortel would not survive totally intact, but maximize the number of R&D, high-skilled jobs in Canada? I think, we've had bailouts around the world and in this country, and it seems to me that when you have thousands of high-tech, highly skilled R&D people, and that innovation and ideas are the way of the future in this country, that it's a loss to Nortel, but it's also a loss to the country if all of those people are gone south of the border, elsewhere in the world, lost to the country. So did you put that case to the government? And if so, how did you put that case, and what did the government say?
We did have a number of very in-depth discussions. That's in November, December, and January. There was a number of cases presented to the government, very active discussions. We still, but there's no specific actions came out of those.
But with all due respect, productive discussions, it sounds a bit like the descriptions of the recent conversations between Mr. Ignatieff and Mr. Harper. And productive meetings and words of, those words are used when you don't want to tell people what happened. What I'm asking you is what actually did happen. I mean, in terms of Ignatieff Harper, we heard after a couple of days what did happen, but those meetings you had were a long time ago. So my question is, what specific proposals did you make to the government for some kind of assistance, whether to keep the jobs, to help the pensioners, or any other proposals that you put on the table, and what was their answer? And I don't want to just hear we had productive discussions.
We did have lots of discussions. Preserving employment was at the top of the list. We're currently pursuing a number of discussions internally and with outside companies as to the best way to preserve value for the company, including preserving employment. And the government has been active in those, and they may be supporting some future activities, but we did have a specific ask, and that specific ask was did not materialize.
So you did ask for something specific, and the government said no?
Correct.
And what did you ask for?
I mean, sir, this is obviously, I'm assuming you can get information internally. Those are private discussions, and they're very active discussions, and I'm sure.
Well, I think in the parliamentary committee, you're supposed to answer the questions. Can you tell me at least the general nature of the proposal to which the government said no? What was it you were asking them to do?
I mean, sir, there was a general ask for financial assistance for a period of time.
How much?
I mean, sir, again, this is those were.
Financial assistance to do what? For the pensioners or for other purposes?
Okay. 1 minute, Mr. McDowell.
I mean, those are discussions to help the company not to go into CCAA.
So these were proposals to help the company keep going and maintain operations in Canada?
I mean, to continue as an ongoing company without going to CCAA, correct?
Okay, well, I don't think I'm going to get any more, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCallum. We'll go, Monsieur Carrier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zafarowski, pleasure to see you this morning. However, this is a rather sad day for democracy, for our parliamentary system, because given the answers that you've given my colleagues, I am learning that you have met with ministers of cabinet to talk about your financial standing. And it would seem that your greatest asset are your employees. Nortel's greatest assets are its employees, and they were in no way consulted on a possible government bailout. I find that regrettable, because in government, when we talk about employment insurance, which has many shortcomings right now, there are people who are not receiving EI benefits, and they're going to have to wait even longer because of current negotiations. It seems as though we no longer care about Canadians and Quebecers. It seems as though we no longer care about human beings, and I find this very sad. So I am wondering if you even at all consider your employees, because in my mind, your employees are your greatest source of wealth. How do you see your future if you no longer have the confidence nor the appreciation of employees who you do not think about, who you do not consider? You simply make a decision of slashing through their pensions after they've served years and years. There are certainly many things that are not right in a company. There are typical problems that arise, but yet you do not seem to be considering the most important problems. And now you say that because of the current economic difficulties, you say that certain executives will receive their bonuses and their millions and millions of dollars. I deplore this situation. And as my colleague said earlier, I hope that you stay and listen to your former employees. I think it would be a good idea to listen to them and understand their distress and their situation. So if you could just summarize your position, I'd very much appreciate that.
And I'm sorry, position on what part?
Sur l'ensemble de ce que je vous dis,
On everything that I've just stated about how you have treated your employees. Given the economic situation, obviously this recession is not easy, especially given the current government's collaboration. The courts have allowed you to take the action that you already have. And as a democracy, well, you should care about the collective well-being. And you are, in fact, an instrument of that. And so I just want to hear your opinion about all of that.
Question, but let me just make a couple of comments. Nortel had 100,000 employees back in 2000, 100,000. Market cap was more than $250 million. It was in a tailspin end of 2005, down to 33,000 employees. I can just tell you the work ethic, the support, the excitement from the population for the last 3 years have been second to none. Many of us were in a mission to have one of the great turnarounds in business. It was all based with people. Most of the promotions were inside the company. Really thought we would be able to take 4 or 5 years of going backwards to create a company for the future. We took some big investments, lots of those in Ottawa, on fourth generation wireless, unified communications. You can just go through the Ottawa. So this was not playing defense, because we knew if that trend was continuing in 2005, this business would have been bankrupt a number of years ago. We thought we were there middle of 2008. Things changed. And I can tell you the same commitment and passion. The reason I'm here, this will not be a long-term outcome, I'm certain of that. But the reason I'm here, because I think I can make a difference, taking the company through this stage, and a big part of the efforts which we're driving is to preserve the greatest numbers of jobs, which I think we are doing a good job at this time, and it will be proven over the next number of months.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Deckert, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Zafirowski, Mr. McCallum mentioned earlier the former market cap of Nortel. I remember a few years ago, I think it represented approximately a third of the value of all the companies listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So I guess all Canadians, or most Canadians, have shared in Nortel's pain. Now I represent the city of Mississauga, where a lot of your recently severed and retired former employees live. I wonder if you could tell us if, through the Company Creditors Arrangement Act proceedings, you have any plans to ask the court to set aside any of the funds that might come from proceeds of sale of assets for the benefit of recently severed employees for their severance obligations, or for the pension plan to help bring its funding back up to full funding level. Do you have any plans for that?
No. We are viewing, and this is based on a very strong legal advice, that the creditors, including all current and former employees, will be in the same level of protection. So if you're a pensioner, employee, bondholder, supplier, my job, our job is to optimize. And just another clarification, this is the severance policy is applicable,
right,
obviously, to everything that's happened at this point in time, including levels of management, and we are pretty confident that that decision is...
Would you be prepared to ask the court to set aside some of those funds if there's a sale of assets, for example? Would you be prepared to recommend that to the court?
I mean, we had been prepared. I mean, the strong advice was that they would not be approved.
All right, let me ask you another question. Sorry.
Maybe I can, since it's a legal question, maybe I can be of assistance here. That I think the point that Mrs. Zarowski made early on was that, you know, this company is now under a court-supervised process where you've got the monitor, you've got various creditors committees. So we don't make decisions on our own. It's a consultative process.
But you could make recommendations, could you not?
I'm sorry?
You could make recommendations. You could make a
Can I also say that there are the court has appointed counsel for all employees.
I understand.
And that, in fact, counsel for employees have made that motion, and it's in fact in front of the courts right now.
I understand that. I just wondered if the company would make that submission as well. Let me ask you another question. Mr. Zafarowski, can you tell us what the value of any scientific research and experimental development tax credits are that are currently held by Nortel? Unused tax credits, ballpark.
I do not have the exact number, but the number is very significant.
Okay, I've been told it's in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion.
Yeah, it's well over $1 billion, correct.
Okay, so given it's a valuable asset of the company, are you aware that the retirees' position is that those tax credits were earned with their quite substantial skill and efforts over the years and represent a significant value and asset of the company? Given that, would you consider contributing part of the value of those tax credits if you were to sell them to another third party that would then use those tax credits? Would you be prepared to contribute some portion of those tax credits, the value the company received from the sale of those tax credits, to either the retired, recently severed employees fund or the pension fund?
I certainly will take a look at it, but my understanding is simply said is that all the creditors are on the same place, not back of the bus. There's no one in front, if you will. If the question is, can we make severance payments and pension to be a priority over all the others? Certainly lots of empathy for that. I do not believe that's going to be possible.
I would suggest that maybe you could make that submission to the court, for the court to deal with. And I just have another question. I know my time is short. And that is, would you, in your future business plans, have any plan for paying any of those past severance obligations going forward? The company comes out of CCAA, it's profitable again. Would you make plans in your future business plans to compensate those severed employees?
Very briefly.
I mean, that's part of the restructuring plan, which the courts will have to approve. And in that process, we'll be dealing with all the creditors. Again, I do not believe there'll be a priority for anyone. But
you might be willing to consider that?
I mean, the short answer, absolutely. Again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have time for about 2 or 3 minutes. Ms. Hall-Finley, for a short round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Zafarowski and Mr. Tay, for being here. Just before my question, my colleagues have asked that we, and I suspect everyone would agree, to the extent that you are able to stay here for the following hour. After that, if you have any comments, we would really appreciate hearing from you based on what you've heard in the following hour, and if those comments could be actually flowed through the clerk so that we can all see them, that would be very much appreciated. When General Motors and Chrysler approached the federal government for aid, the first time, they were denied aid, and very publicly the reason was that their plan was not viable enough. I understand your hesitation to disclose details of your conversations with the government, but I would ask, if you, and you have said you did ask the federal government for assistance, that assistance was denied, can you please tell us the reasons why that assistance was denied?
I mean, brief, and I do want to stay brief on this, is that a combination of the viability of the industry and the plan was one. And what if this was more of an company-specific as opposed to an industry-specific matter, the auto industry being viewed as industry-specific issue, and some of the challenges around Nortel being viewed more as a company-specific.
But do you think that, given your understanding of Nortel and Nortel's viability and your efforts to keep it out of CCAA, and given what you have read for the last several months in terms of government assistance for General Motors and Chrysler and their ability and their sector, do you think that the government should have actually given Nortel assistance?
The industry, where we're expecting it to have a 5 or 10% growth industry, that overnight went to 20% decline, a very, very significant shift in the telecom and the communications industry. So any plan that was presented at that point in time, including internally, could have been viewed with lots of skepticism, if you will. So in terms of it, do you have a viable, guaranteed plan at fourth quarter 2008? The industry came down 30% in revenues from where it was supposed to be. I mean, that's arguments have been made by many that it was very difficult to have a 100% secured plan for Nortel for the future.
30 seconds.
I suspect it's hard for all of the stakeholders, employees, shareholders, everyone in Nortel to have you do what you can do to make sure that this company remains viable, and yet somehow acknowledge that the government may have not provided assistance because it wasn't viable. And I will just add in that from a Canadian, and my colleague, Mr. McCallum, I think, pointed out that the future of this country is, we believe, very strongly based on innovation and research and development and the technologies, and we see a disconnect.
I agree with that. I think the governments also believe, as a side note, that that's the case, and I am very confident to tell you that all discussions internally, preserving R&D jobs in whatever final restructuring form will there be for Nortel, is a major priority, and we are hopeful that announcements forthcoming later this summer will in fact be consistent with the view that we've done everything possible successfully to optimize the R&D jobs in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Zafirowski. Colleagues, we will suspend for about 2 minutes, and we'll bring the other witnesses to the table. So we'll suspend for 2 minutes, and if we can ask those other witnesses who are appearing for the second hour to please come forward to the table.
The request to stay, and also appreciate, I'm not sure if that's with your approval, to make some comments after the 1 hour, but I will stay. I've never shied away from employees. That's always been the favorite part of my job, is to talk with employees, and if I can have 3 or 4 minutes at the end to make some comments, I will appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I ask you to take your seats, please. If we could have the cameras, please respect the committee. Gentlemen, if we could have the cameras be shut off, please. We will be resuming the committee. Just let me, if I could have the cameras respect the parliamentary committee, please. Okay. Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I know we have a busy schedule, and I would like, before we break, that I think we have unanimous consent to deal with the motion on the parliamentary budgetary officer that you have at the end of the agenda. Can we just pass it now if we have agreement?
Consent to pass that motion.
Issue McClare, are you here with us, or Thomas?
Do we have unanimous consent?
Yes. Oui.
Mr. Mulcair, Monsieur Laforêt, oui.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Monsieur Laforêt.
J'aurais quand même un amendement.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to Mr. Wallace's motion, that we include in the notice of motion a definition of the regions that are designated and to which the tax credit applies. Let's include the definition into the motion, in the motion.
As amended. Thank you, colleagues. We have with us here today, okay, for the second hour, we have the Nortel Retirees and Former Employees Protection Committee. We have Mr. Donald Sproul, National Committee Chair, Ken Lyons, Representative. We have the Canadian Nortel Employees on Long-Term Disability, the leader, Lawrence Clooney. And we have three individuals. We have, again, Diane Urquhart, Independent Analyst, Paul Hanreader, Professional Engineer, and David Jeans, Nortel Pensioner. So if we can go in that order, and if you could limit your opening comments to 5 minutes so we can have time for members to ask questions. Mr. Sproul, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you to all members of this committee, and thank you for this opportunity to speak about the situation of retirees and former employees of Nortel Networks.
Includes Nortel retirees and former employees formed after Nortel filed for bankruptcy protection on January 14th. We represent some 17,500 pensioners across Canada, the bulk of them in Ontario, but 3,000 in Quebec and 2,000 in other provinces. Of that, there's another 11,000 people that are represented in the health plan. There's 750 pensioners that receive additional benefits, and over 1,000 severed employees that are affected by what's happening in Nortel. And today, in other discussions, I've discovered another 450 employees on long-term disability that are being affected by what's happening with Nortel. So why are we here today? We're here. We wish we weren't here. We wish there was a viable solution for Nortel to emerge from CCAA. But there's no indication that such a plan is forthcoming, and in fact, the press is full of indications that the pieces will be sold off, and what will be left will be a rump of the corporation. There is a Save Nortel campaign that's underway from former executives, and I wish them well, and I hope they get oxygen, enough oxygen to breathe. But the reason that I am here is I must plan for the worst outcome, and that worst outcome will be the wind-up of Nortel. Now, who is affected? It's the registered pension plan. It's underfunded. Yes, the pension assets are segregated from the corporation, but there's a significant piece of underfunding in the plan itself, to the tune of about $1 billion. And it represents two plans, both the negotiated plan but the non-negotiated plan as well. And so there's union retirees that are also affected. And that plan, as Mr. Zafrowski has said, has dropped 31% since the last evaluation. Under CCAA and BIA, our pension deficit will sink to unsecured creditor status. The retiree health plan and other benefit plans are underfunded, and that whole area is extremely opaque. Pension plans are at least public and there's information available. So unlike the registered plans, it's not funded. It's paid out of Nortel revenues, zero visibility in terms of long-term viability of these plans, and there's no provincial or federal government oversight. These claims will actually sink to unsecured creditor status. In the case of putting pensions plus health plan together and a loss of that for some of our members, it would be welfare for some of those people. In preparing for this, I started looking at long-term disability group. Again, no federal and provincial standards for long-term disability. The plan is administered through Nortel's Health and Welfare Trust, and it's funded, again, through Nortel general revenues on a quarterly basis. It is a self-insured plan. There is no backing of any insurance companies. So if Nortel goes insolvent, the long-term disability people, their monthly payments will sink to unsecured creditor status. And if they ever make it to pension plan, they'll lose any accruement of those dollars in terms of making it to a pension plan, and for them, they'll lose crucial health care. Again, welfare for some and people who are ill-equipped to look after themselves. And finally, the severance people. Employment Standards Act, from what I understand, are a lot in the provincial domain, but again, those standards are being overridden by CCAA and BIA. And those severance claims will sink again to unsecured creditor status. And as we all know, that the severed employees now have to move on to EI and get handouts from the taxpayer. So who are the unsecured creditors? Well, let's look at number one, at the note holders. The bondholders, a sophisticated bunch of money managers, sophisticated not only on the bondholder side, but in the corporation. They negotiate between equals. They do it for a living. And the bondholders take an active view of risk management. What happens if the corporation goes bankrupt? They look at the probability of default. They shorten the maturity dates on bonds. They ask for higher yield. And they're clever enough to make sure that they get cross guarantees between the two jurisdictions of Nortel, between the U.S. and Canada. And in this environment, the original bondholders are actually probably sold off a lot of their assets, and it's been picked up by vulture bondholders. And the information that I have is those bonds are probably going at 12 cents on the dollar. Now, I don't know what the outcome is going to be in terms of if Nortel goes insolvent, but as an unsecured creditor, I'm going to get something north of 12 cents on the dollar. Let's call it 20 cents on the dollar. But I and all of the people that I've talked about are going to take a significant haircut. I'm worried about other jurisdictions. This is a very complex case. Nortel is a large organization. From what I understand, in Nortel Canada, there are very few assets. There's little cash and a global R&D center with huge costs associated with it, so many liabilities. And one of the most significant liabilities, I believe, it's what's represented by the group that I represent, in terms of $1 billion at least from a pension underfunding, plus another maybe $300 million in terms of if you add up all the other issues. Outside Canada, there's cash. And outside Canada, there's cash that probably can't be reached because it's tied up in China, where they have policies that don't allow you to bring the cash back to Canada. So my concern, again as a creditor, is to make sure that the rightful assets belong to the parent corporation come back to Canada. And also I am concerned about other jurisdictions trying to reach out and grab assets in Canada where indeed there are limited Canadian assets. So let me move on to the retirees. We are not a sophisticated bunch of money managers. There is a real inequality in understanding between what the company understands of the pension plan and what the retirees understand. We've put in place a lifetime of work, invested in our pensions and our benefits, and for us, risk management was all about, am I going to live too long? Am I going to live too short? And is my wife going to be looked after? What happens if my health declines? I need a good health plan. The things that we didn't consider and never contemplated was company bankruptcy. For the disabled employees, again, the wage replacement, their health care claims are going to sink to unsecured status. And any, as I mentioned before, pension accruement will sink to unsecured status. And these people are not eligible for EI, not eligible for WEPP, and they're going to get, all they're going to get is their CPP disability. For the severed employees, no severance. In fact, and I think most of the employees not even contemplated that they weren't going to get severance. And it's highly unusual, I believe, that in terms of severance, that people are not paid severance as they leave the corporation. And as I mentioned before, these people have been forced to EI and going on to the taxpayer's expense. So what we have here is an egregious imbalance. This problem has been known for a while, and it's not been fixed, where people such as pensioners and the disabled and former employees sink to the bottom of the ladder. And in today's economic climate, things are going to be brought forward. So it's not just about assets, even tax implications. The bondholder is going to get tax write-offs, they're going to get tax gains. I don't know what we're going to get. We're going to lose money, but I doubt we're going to be given any treatment from a taxation point of view. So why I'm here today is to request you, the members of Parliament, to remedy this situation. The CCAA and BIA sinks us down to unsecured creditor status, and I urge you with the utmost urgency to grant us higher priority ranking to the pensioners, to the disabled employees, and to the severeds, and to handle their claims. This is a federal jurisdiction. Pensions are province issues, but this is a federal jurisdiction. 2 days ago, there was a unanimous vote in the House and one of the items in that unanimous vote was to give pensions higher priority in bankruptcy. Unanimous agreement. Now that unanimous agreement has now been shifted off to a study and some other committee. I think what's interesting about the proposal here today, no new government spending. So again, there's an opportunity. So government, you're investing in infrastructure today to protect the economy. Could you please invest in the legal framework to correct this egregious imbalance? This legislation, as far as I'm concerned, is shovel-ready, and I implore you to act and to act quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go right away to Mr. Clooney. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of witnesses to get through, so we'll go quickly. We want to have questions for members, so we'll go Mr. Clooney right away, please.
I'd like to pass my right to speak to Sue Kennedy, who's actually the chair of the group.
Okay. Ms. Kennedy, please.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the chance to speak to everyone here because we've been sort of hiding in the back because our benefits were still being paid up to now, and we appreciate that. You don't know how much we appreciate that. As people on LTD, we have no options. We basically ended our working career when we qualified for LTD. Now that things are getting to this stage, there's only probably a small percentage of people on LTD who recognize that their benefits might be at risk. And we know very well how much they are at risk from doing a lot of research on the subject. We wonder why Nortel could get tax benefits by storing the money to provide our benefits in a health and welfare trust, but did not insure these LTD benefit as specifically recommended by the Canada Revenue Agency's bulletin on the subject. We also wonder why our government has no way of enforcing that requirement and tells us that we need to come to the Finance Committee to ask them why it was not protected and what can the Finance Committee do about that. Right now, we're still being paid. We appreciate that. We also appreciate it could end at any time. And we have a lot of years before we can get to our pensions, if there is enough pensions left, thanks to the efforts of all the pensioner group. During that time while we're waiting, which could be up to 24 years for some of the people in our group that we know, we will no longer get our wage replacement. It was 70% of our original salary for most people. That salary could be way back, like in my case, in $1994, so that was pretty small salary to start with. From that, if we get 20 cents on the dollar, I'll be making about 20% of what my salary was that I was getting from the LTD pay. We will lose our health benefits, and many of us, in addition to making great use of the health benefits provided by Nortel, many of us also have significant out-of-pocket health costs, so this is another factor that really worries us. We can't qualify for EI because we weren't paying into it, or for wage earner protection plan. We'll be left with CPP disability. That will be about 20% of what we were making on our LTD. CPP disability was designed to provide 25% of the basic minimum that people need to live on. As Nortel employees, I think we deserve better than that. Instead, some people on LTD will end up possibly on welfare. We will end up dependent on the government, not in a proactive way in that they protected our benefits, but retroactively applying for welfare. Some people in our group will end up in the Royal Ottawa Hospital, and one already has. And that's really hard for us to see because of all the stress this is causing us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now go Ms. Urquhart for your presentation, please.
I'm an independent financial analyst. Nortel was operating at a cost structure above what its revenues could support, and it's burning cash at the rate of $1 billion annually. All of the figures that I'm giving today are in U.S. dollars. The financial crisis is causing a large drop in telecommunications equipment sales throughout the world, and Nortel, due to the uncertainty of whether it's liquidating or not, is having its revenues declining at a much greater rate than its peers in the industry. I'd like to emphasize that Nortel chose to enter bankruptcy protection in January 2009 by missing a $107 million interest payment, despite the company having $2.5 billion of cash on its balance sheet. Nortel's next major principal repayment is not until 2011, when $1 billion of debt will need to be repaid. That, of course, is 2 years from now. We're dealing with much more stressful situations in other bankruptcies that have already got debt repayments that cannot be refinanced. Nortel management has indicated that it has volunteered to enter bankruptcy protection in order to avoid paying severance. We don't have detailed estimates from the company, but on the assumption of the 5,000 jobs cut around the world, the estimated bill for severance would be approximately $500 million, of which we would anticipate Canada to be approximately $100 million in U.S. dollars. Under the current CCAA and BIA laws, it is correct that severance does not have preferred priority over unsecured creditors. I would like to note, however, that it is prevalently the case that numerous companies that have filed for CCA protection enter in the beginning days of the process to seek approval from the judge for the payment of severance. In this case, they have chosen not to do that, and they have in fact said that the purpose of the filing was not to pay severance in order, as we heard many times today, to optimize the value of Nortel. We need to pay bonuses to the current employees to preserve the value of Nortel. Obviously, severance and making special contributions in order to top up the pension fund deficit is, in his mind, Mr. Zafirowski, for respect, is depleting value for the estate. So from my perspective, those statements of optimizing value have a lot to do with maximizing the value for the bondholders by not paying the severance and the pension fund deficits around the world. Indeed, Nortel is definitely technically bankrupt. The value of the assets on the pending sales, or as in the early stages of ongoing concern, are considerably less than the estimated $11 billion of claims. I've estimated, based on what we can find from the actuarial reports, which the updated actuarial reports, that the employment-related claims in the world are approximately $5 billion. So we have half of the creditor claims that are presently being sought for compromise are in the employment-related field: severance, disability, pension fund deficits, not only in Canada but in the rest of the world. It's very clear to me, listening to the presentation of management earlier today, that it is no longer vigorously pursuing Nortel as an ongoing concern. All of the phrases are, "I tried to rectify the company," "I really believed in the turnaround." These are all in the past tense. This group, both the terminated employees and the retirees, would like to have an ongoing concern in order to better enable the payment of the pension fund deficits, and more importantly, to provide research and development jobs in our country for the children of the retirees, the engineering graduates, the mathematics graduates, and the physics and so on graduates, that they could have gainful employment in their pursuit of innovation within Canada and not have to go to the research and development centres of the foreign buyers of the Nortel businesses. I'd like to note that it is erroneous for the government to say that it is reluctant to intervene in the provincial jurisdictions for severance and pension benefit standards. It is the federal government that administers the Company Creditors Arrangement Act and the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. I don't have time today to go into all the details of this, but I urge everyone to examine the Court of Appeal of Ontario case by Justice Farley when the Superintendent of Financial Services of Ontario asked his court to approve the special contributions in order to replace the deficit of the AVACO pension plan. He turned down that request, even though that would have been in the normal course of provincial legislation, on the premise that AVACO would be liquidating, and as a consequence, under BIA, the pension deficits and the special contributions were pari passu with the unsecured claims. He was unwilling to execute the protections that were in the Ontario Pension Benefit Act. It is for this reason, and as a result of what we have also heard today as to what the premise was for not paying the employment-related claims in the Nortel case, that we ask for an emergency amendment of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act to give super priority to the severance and pension deficits over the bondholders and over the unsecured suppliers in this situation. A statement was made that there were no secured creditors in this company. I'd like to note that there's $200 million of debtor and financing, non-arm's length financing that has come up from the United States that has been granted super priority status with respect to the cash disbursements that will come from the sale of assets by Nortel, which is still a Canadian-based company, although, of course, there are multiple subsidiaries and multiple areas of the world that have their own legal corporations and their own specific indentures and considerations. A point was made by Don Spruill, who is the head of the Retirees Protection Committee, that Canada is in a particularly precarious situation. Even though Nortel has a 115-year history and is the Canadian base of operations for one-half of the research and development of Nortel in the world, it is primarily a cost center. And this is typical of a number of successful international companies. We have a situation that due to the intercorporate transactions between Canada and the United States with respect to internal transfer pricing agreements, intercorporate loans and so on, that it is our firm belief that unless there is government intervention, that there will be limited cash from the disbursements of the sales of Nortel available for provision of top-ups to the pension plan and to the severance. So much so that we could have nothing in Canada, or perhaps 10 cents on the dollar. I think it is very optimistic at this point, based on the intercorporate transactions without intervention by the CEO of the company, to disband with internal contracts to ensure that there is the appropriate amount of money that's dedicated for the payment of the pension deficits.
Ms. Urquhart, if I could just ask you to conclude.
Okay, so basically we're asking for the BIA amendment. We're asking for Mr. Clements to be required to set conditions on the pending sale of businesses by the Canadian-based company to international, that a substantial portion of the proceeds not go to the debt holders of Nortel, but go into the pension fund and to pay for the severed workers.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Is it Hanreader or Hanreader?
Hanreader, yeah.
Hanreader, please, for your opening statement.
Okay, good morning. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Paul Hanreader. I'm a terminated employee of Nortel with almost 15 years with the company. I would like to thank the members of this committee, and especially Mr. Mulcair, for the opportunity to come here today and speak to you on issues related to Nortel's bankruptcy protection and filing, and the impacts of terminated employees and ancillary effects to Canadian taxpayers that have resulted. Since the bankruptcy announcement on January 14th of this year, there have been significant impacts to employees that have worked extremely hard and given their hearts and souls to this company for a great many years. I speak to you today in representation of well over 440 terminated employees that have been laid off, and another 600 more potentially expected to be terminated this year. If you can only imagine the sheer terror that many of us awoke to on that fateful day, dreams of moving on and building new lives, finding new jobs, building new businesses, and all manner of other hopes and dreams all vanished in seconds. The vast majority of employees had decades of history with Nortel and were promised industry standard severances that would have permitted them to transition smoothly into new roles and opportunities.
Mr. Henry, I'm just told that you're too fast for translation, so if you can just...
Oh, okay. I'll slow down.
Sorry.
Okay. All of these contracts were conveniently rendered null and void when Nortel filed for creditor protection under the federal CCA legislation. To our even further surprise, we were now to be ranked equal to unsecured creditors and could only hope to expect pennies on the dollar in a settlement that could easily be over a year away. We also discovered that severance and pension issues are only protected under provincial jurisdiction, but under federal CCAA protection, all provincial requirements are no longer honored. At the time the company filed for creditor protection, it was sitting with over $2.5 billion of cash on its books. It boggled all of our minds to understand how creditor protection filing was needed with that much cash available. We were only weeks before assured by the CEO that we had liquidity well into Q4 of 2009. What we need to fix. CCAA and BIA legislation needs to be revised to give super priority to current and former employees' claims in these circumstances. Employees and pensioners have no recourse with a bankrupt company and as such cannot be treated as a commercial creditor. Employees and pensioners need to be acknowledged as a unique group. Ensure that CCAA cannot be used as it has in this case to prevent provincial employment standard laws or to circumvent provincial employment standard laws and to hide from employee financial obligations for severance and pension top-up requirements. Please reference the Mike Zafrowski's email that I've provided in my brief from 1/30/09. It clearly states that it was key to Nortel's liquidity going forward that severance obligations be waived through the creditor protection process. Unfortunately, despite the clear focus on liquidity and finding a way through their debt minefield, the company is now paying $45 million in executive bonuses and paying employee incentive bonuses of an estimated $68 million internally. This does not sound to us as a company that is trying to find a way out of financial straits. This path is an all-too-easy way for employers to unload employee obligations onto the Canadian government and its taxpayers. This path pushed an expected 1,100 employees onto unemployment insurance at an estimated cost to us as taxpayers of $20 million, a loss of $34 million in income taxes from the severance payments we would have to have paid. All told, by skillful execution of this legal plan, Nortel avoids paying an estimated $125 million in severance obligations in Canada, $1.25 billion in pension obligations, $200 million in post-retirement health and other benefits. They also got to take out of the pockets of all Canadians about $54 million without a single shot being fired. Wow, this is a pretty sweet deal for them. This was all accomplished using the loopholes that exist in this aging CCAA and BIA legislation and with the help of $5.5 million per month of lawyers. This needs to be fixed and fixed now as it has been and will be used by many more companies that will go into bankruptcy in the future. We as the severed employees of Nortel want to ensure this indignity is not propagated onto any other hardworking Canadian employee in the future. We want to ensure the laws are amended and ensure that employers such as Nortel are forced to honor their employee obligations and do the moral and ethical thing for the employees. Nortel and its executives need to be made accountable to this case, and before any bonuses are paid out, they need to be made to honor their severance and pension commitments. Please refer to the additional briefs that we've provided on this matter, as I could not cover all the issues in this short presentation. We're more than happy to work with any levels of government to rectify the situation for future generations. In closing, I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention here and once again ask our government to begin immediate work on fixing the federal CCAA and BIA laws to protect innocent Canadian workers going forward. I will close now and make myself available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll go finally to Mr. Jeans, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'll speak very briefly as an individual and as a pensioner. I joined Bell Northern Research, which subsequently became part of Nortel back in 1973 and went on pension 29 years later. I want to say that one of the problems that you are facing is that among the 20,000 or so people who are already affected or are going to be affected by the underfunding of the pension plan, many are completely unaware of the risk that they are at. Many older people, I've been spoken to by many people who are on survivor pensions and who have continued to assume that their pensions were protected by government, and that these issues of the underfunding of the pension plan, the impact of the failure of the stock market, and the impending cancellation of many of these supplementary benefits, such as health plan, life insurance. The health plan, of course, includes dental benefits, includes drug plan, and so on, which is absolutely crucial for these older retirees, and many of them are going to be in a case of extreme hardship. In this room today, I recognize many former colleagues and contacts from Nortel. I think you've heard repeatedly that, and through many other contacts, that Nortel was very much a teamwork kind of company that made a huge contribution to Canada's technology economy. It functioned like a university. It was perhaps more important than the National Research Council in terms of creating knowledge and intellectual property that allowed the formation of many companies and many world-leading technologies. It was a jewel that is at risk of loss, and therefore I, like many other former Nortel employees, hope that initiatives, for example, the Robert Fairchat proposal that part of the company might be resurrected to create once again a much smaller but still a technology jewel as part of Canada's technology economy may be possible. I will say that you have many people who could not come into this room today. There were people who were turned away outside and are standing on the front steps outside Parliament this morning. Back in January, when Nortel first filed for CCAA protection, we had over 700 people show up trying to get into the first information meeting, organized entirely by volunteers, because many of us as pensioners, as retirees, have just not had the kind of information from the company or from the monitor to really make it clear what's happening in this kind of process. So we're here before you today, and you've heard some eloquent proposals from the Nortel Retiree Protection Committee, and I have volunteered also to help that committee. But I just wanted to speak today as a pensioner, like many of the people sitting behind me, for whom this is a crucial issue, and federal government intervention is essential because although this is a multi-jurisdiction problem, as you've heard, many of the problems have been created because the federal process overrides provincial protections that we were relying on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go to questions from members immediately. We'll go Mr. Pichetti to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing. Very interesting. I knew we'd get another version of the facts. You know, it's difficult. Everybody, I think, in this room is here for the right reason. I think we all sympathize with the employees, former employees. It's funny how we got here. We're here for actually another reason. We're conducting a study on the financial stability of the stability of our financial system and the credit availability, and then we've noticed that there was problems with pensions, and so we've been conducting a study, and as it turns out, there's no better case study than the present case study because it's actually a live one. And now we're caught in a dilemma because as parliamentarians, we actually have committees and we have our own responsibilities within that committee. Forget about the jurisdictional responsibilities that we have, whether it be federal politicians, provincial or municipal politicians. You're lucky I can toss the ball over because we have a parliamentary secretary for industry, but I'm not sure how we're going to be able to solve this. But there's 2 points here. There's the same question that I asked Mr. Zawrowski initially, is that how do we avoid this from happening again, and what do we do now? What is happening now is probably, I hate to say it's a commercial dispute, but there's definitely a disagreement on the facts, and how do we get to an agreement if we can't even agree on what happened in the past? So this is a big problem. Everybody pretty well has suggested that we need to change the CCA. I don't know how that's going to happen in the next little while and help the people that we're trying to help. So I need some direction. I mean, I have to understand a little bit of what's happened in the past. For example, Mr. Sproul, what happened? I mean, you talk about the bondholders being sophisticated, but I beg to differ. I mean, the bondholders are not sophisticated, or else they wouldn't have invested. I think they're the least sophisticated of all, and that's what we've been able to see during all our studies. And I'm going to turn around and put the blame maybe on you guys, because you guys are actually there. You're the employees. You see what's going on. Why didn't you help us and say, hey, maybe this is not a company that we should be investing in? And it might be a hard question. You might laugh at it, but you guys are the front people. And what happened there?
If I could just respond to the sophistication, if the bondholders are not sophisticated, then I hate to say what I am, because I don't have the assets or the resources to investigate. And they, when they investigate, look after, is the company going to go bankrupt? I don't, as an individual, as a pensioner. Now, in terms of where did
the bondholders that now have the bonds are probably sophisticated because they're dealing with what they're speculating.
Sure.
Now. But I'm talking about the original bondholders that actually did lose money, because those bondholders are actually in this room, because those are our pensions, right? That's who invested in those bonds.
Indirectly.
Indirectly.
Yeah. Now, so the question is where did the company go wrong? I mean, it's been 6 years since I left, and I don't know. Certainly the legal issues in terms from an accounting point of view did not help the company. And then we had a period of, I think, where senior management was probably creating an air of confidence and stability and integrity, but not leading the company forward. And I think maybe by the time Mr. Zafrowski came around, it was he was working on the right things, but he had some real challenges in front of him. And what really, I think, precipitated some of this is the marketplace, the collapse of the marketplace. The water went down, and those ships that were having troubles were exposed. So that, that tsunami of what's happened in the marketplaces has certainly hurt the company. And if I understand correctly, there were some obligations in the UK from a pension point of view that actually helped drive the company into Chapter 11. That was sort of the triggering event to go into CCAA.
Well, that's part of the struggle that we have.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I know you're speaking as a former employee, but do the employees presently structure themselves right now? I don't want to use the word unionize, but are they structured? Don't you get together and decide whether the benefits that you do have access to are you not organized in that fashion?
Not at all.
Okay. Just a quick question for Ms. Kennedy, because my time is limited, so I just want to. Ms. Kennedy, how about what happened in your case? You sort of, again, faulted the employer. And again, I'm not taking sides. What I'm trying to understand is by saying they didn't take insurance. But would that not have been one of the questions you would have asked? Because then you turn around and you say, well, it's the government's responsibility to make sure that the employer has the responsibility for them to have insurance.
We looked for many people who might have insured our benefits. It was a long search. At first, we originally thought that it was Sun Life. Then we discovered it was administrative services only. Then we looked at the fact that the money was placed in a health and welfare trust, and that, according to the Canada Revenue Agency bulletins, and by the way, I'm no way near being an accountant, I'm a psychologist. According to those bulletins, it said that the LTD part only of the benefits that are put in there.
Well, as an accountant wouldn't have been responsible for your health plan. I mean, that's in the fine print. I think you can blame that on the lawyers. I think we can agree on that.
Yes.
But the question again is to avoid this from happening in the future. How can we prevent that in the future? I mean, you're contributing to an insurance plan, and you're expecting the insurance plan to have an insurance. Is that feasible?
There's about 1 minute here.
Attempts were made in Alberta to protect problems like this, but it was done at the provincial government level, and they changed the Insurance Act so that a self-insured company providing LTD insurance.
I have to interrupt you because I just want to ask a quick question to Diane. Diane, you put a lot in your brief like usual, and it's maybe if I can be critical, it's all over the place. But one of the things, and I think it's important that Mr. Zafrowski perhaps respond to it, is the fact that you mentioned that there is a secured creditor when he specifically stated that there were no secured creditors. I think that's an important point, and I think that if you can make that clear and perhaps...
Sure.
Ms. Urquhart, just very briefly, please.
Yeah. There's a $200 million debtor in possession line of credit that has been offered by Nortel Networks, Inc., and the beneficiary of that is Nortel Networks Limited, which is the Canadian operation. And this is typical financing. And in the first days of the bankruptcy protection filing, the court granted that would have preferred status above all unsecured creditors. So since it is super priority, I would say it's effectively secured financing, and it's certainly to the detriment of the net asset estate for Canada, which is available to pay the pro rata share to the severance and to the pension deficits of Canada.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pichetti. We'll go. Well, I think,
if you're interested, but
Mr. Zafar, I think what we would do is at the end, we'll give you, we might have about 3 minutes at the end. It'll be a very short time. But we'll go, Monsieur Laforêt, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to all of our witnesses. I'd like to address my first question to Mr. Ken Lyons, the representative from the Nortel Retirees Protection Committee. I know that you also sit on the Quebec Committee, and you represent approximately 3,000 Nortel employees in Quebec. Earlier, I was listening to my colleague's question. Mr. Carrier asked, or rather said, that human resources are the main source of wealth for companies such as Nortel. People have told us that for them, they have invested their lives and their passion into Nortel. And earlier I asked Mr. Zaworowski how he felt in this situation. In the situation where the board of directors made no attempt to help people. And when it turned to the federal government, it in no way said or gave any indication that it was going to protect its former employees, and that has effects. And Mr. Zaworowski said he didn't want to blame anyone, but I have trouble believing that when I know that other choices were made. And had different choices been made, that is the choice to support retirees and human resources, that it would have been a way of optimizing value for the future. Had they respected those who helped Nortel achieve excellence. So, Mr. Lyons, I'd like for you to comment on that. Good morning. Now, I would ask those who have asked me questions in French to allow me to answer in English.
How do I feel, in this situation? I feel that I was just dumped aside. I gave my life. I loved working for Nortel. It's a passion for me. It is so much a passion so that I still manage a museum voluntarily that boasts about Nortel's history going back from the very beginning. I'm still doing it on a free basis. And nevertheless, we've got pensioners that have pensions of like $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month. If they take the hit of 31%, they're going down to $690 a month. Now think of the survivors. They're taking another hit. So this is, it really hurts because the Nortel I knew was a fabulous company to work for. We stuck together. We knew where we were going and all that. But unfortunately, what I've seen happen, and I retired in in January '99. The company, up to a bit before that point, was well managed. Then they went on to a buying spree, and we ended up with new CEOs that seemed to be intent on creating wealth for themselves, and that caused a downward spiral. Et ceci, ça répond à la question, j'espère.
I hope that answers your question. I'd like for you to talk to us about what you feel, what you think, because I'm sure you have an interpretation of the version of the facts, what you think are the causes of this situation. Could it have been avoided? Are there ways of preventing a similar thing from happening again in the future? so that we can think about ways of addressing the current situation, but also prevent it in the future.
Underfunding is the Income Tax Act. It's not a provincial responsibility, it's a federal responsibility. It prohibits overfunding pension funds by more than 110%. That's the big problem. It was stated by Mr. Zafirowski a while ago that Nortel has maintained their payments, but they took a hit. When they were able and they had the funds to put the money in the pension fund, they were not allowed to do so because of the Income Tax Act. There's been proposals that we've made that should be raised to 125% instead of 110%. There's also another proposal which is far more interesting to companies and the stakeholders, the retirees, is to have this super fund that would sit on top. The companies would have the tax breaks, and if the pension fund is fully funded at 100%, then they could start taking money out of the super fund without having to go through all kinds of hurdles. Now, these are intelligent solutions. There's also solutions that some of our members have looked at that can help our own situation, because it may well be, and we certainly don't hope so, but it may very well be that Nortel will not be able to restructure successfully and keep on with the pension fund obligations. So we're going to be faced with a hit. The big problem that we have right now is a wind-up. We don't want our plan to be wound up if this happens. Keep it alive. And I do not have the information with me, but we have proposals where that could be done without hurting the pensioners as much as it is now.
One last question. Madame Ughart, you gave some solutions and said that former retirees would get priority, especially when if there were sales. Is that what you are proposing? Yes.
That the pension deficits should be treated preferentially, as wages are. Because look at it, what's our pension? When we were working, we were given a salary taking into consideration that we had a pension, so we didn't have quite as much money as others, all right? So that what we have now are deferred wages. It's the same thing with our benefits. One thing I didn't mention a while ago is that we lose our benefits. It's going to cost us about $250 a month on top of the loss that we have. You know, we don't have bonuses. You know, what we see on one side, unfortunately, there's bonuses. They're going up, we're going down.
Okay. Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Krapp now, please. Chair, and thank you to our guests so much for coming in. Mr. Lyons, you of course came up with just a number of points there, Superfund, etc. And these are obviously ideas that this committee has been dealing with, and that we've had a pretty exhaustive study on pension capacities and liabilities. But you also mentioned as well that you have other plans that you would suggest that might even be in the offering. We would like you to submit those in writing to this committee. You certainly don't have the opportunity now with the brevity of time that we have, but I believe we would certainly entertain those and throw them into the mix for our deliberations, so we would appreciate if you would be able to do that.
You can count on it.
Thank you very kindly. Mr. Hunter, I just noticed you've had your hand up on a number of occasions where you just haven't had the opportunity to comment. I know certainly on Mr. Pachetti's.
Yeah, I can
maybe I'll
comment.
give you that opportunity now on a couple of those points.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'd like to comment about the feel of the employees inside. They say that we saw this coming. Well, Nortel employees are probably the most dedicated, hardworking employees. It was a passion, as mentioned by some of the members down here. We went in there, we built the company, we built products that were just amazing in the market, etc. We were fully invested in recovering the company. Mr. Zafirowski on many times rallied us as employees to do that. As I said, rumors of bankruptcy were happening in the November timeframe of last year. They told us very clearly, don't worry, we're into Q4, give us some more hard work, and we'll be more than happy to make this company successful. And like I said, this was a surprise to us. We were fully invested in making the company successful.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps
Mr. Sproul, the actual liabilities that are there in the various sectors, whether it's severance and disability or the pension, the various components of the obviously the liability that sits before all of the people right now, could we have a breakdown as to the percentage and total cost of each of those?
You certainly can. I mean, our actuaries are working on it. We've got, certainly on the pension plan, that's well understood, but we're trying to get an estimate now on the remaining items. But we will certainly table those numbers for you. And some may be estimates and some will be exact figures.
Okay. Could I just ask your comment? Obviously, in priority ranking for the creditor status, there's always that dilemma between servicing that individual and or that pension versus the capacity and availability of being able to raise capital on the markets as a lender. As a lender, you're not going to go to a company and say, well, we're going to provide X amount of dollars, but it's too bad, so sad, and we'll sit at the end of the line either. So it's really a difficult challenge to work through. There have been a number of interesting proposals brought forward, and I'm wondering if your group has given any thought to trying to find that mix that accommodates both. You know, we can't have, you know, just a I win, and or the other corporate entities can't just say, well, only me. So where do we find that slide balance in there? I'd ask your thoughts on that.
Mr. Sproul, and then Mr. Clooney wanted to comment too.
I'll hand it over to Diane in just a second, but I think when you start looking at that balance from an OECD point of view, there are studies out there that basically certain countries are doing quite well, where in bankruptcy the pensioners do get protection and get priority protection. In other jurisdictions where there's no such clause, they have tremendous pension benefit guarantee funds that look after the employees. In the United States, the land of free enterprise, $54,000 a year is what the United States government and the pension benefit guarantee fund guarantees to pensioners. In the UK, £28,000 a year. In Canada, Ontario is the only province that will do it, and they're talking about doing $12,000 a year. 30% of our constituency will get nothing because the other provinces do nothing. So again, yes, it's a balance. It's a balance in terms of what the capital markets expect, and I'll hand it over to Diane, but it's certainly from an OECD point of view, it's an accepted policy.
Can I, Mr. Clooney has wanted to comment as well, so can we get Mr. Clooney and then Ms. Urquhart?
Okay, thank you very much. I have two comments. One was regarding a statement that was made, why didn't we question our LTD benefit? And when I came out of university and I joined Nortel, I got all these benefits, and I thought they were great. And when I looked at the brochures and the glossies, it seemed to me that I was getting an insurance policy. If I go on disability, I would be insured beyond the life of the employer, should they go bankrupt. Everything seemed to look that way. The glossy brochures look that way. My T4A statement states that the payer's name is Sun Life Assurance Company of Canada. Everything looks like that. We have phoned Nortel HR on several occasions in the last several months to find out, are we insured? And we have been given no indication of that. We have not been handed our policies or our contracts, nothing. So we are assuming the worst case scenario that we are not insured. The second thing I'd like to read to you is something that came out of The Economist on May 7, 2009. On April 30th, the U.S. government hands down a ruling as Chrysler entered Chapter 11. Under the proposed scheme, secured creditors owed $7 billion will recover 28 cents per dollar, yet an employee health care trust operated at arm's length by the United Auto Workers Union which ranks lower down on the capital structure, will receive 43 cents on its 11 billion odd claims. There is a precedent that has been set in the U.S. with regards to giving pensioners, disability people, higher ranking on the creditor list.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Urquhart, you have about 30 seconds.
That Australia made an amendment of its Bankruptcy Act on a live case in order to give priority status to pension fund deficits. So we have a precedent in the world. Sweden, Korea, Japan are just amongst a number of companies who give preferred status to severance and pension fund deficits. So for Canada, I would argue that Canada and the United States, and perhaps to a degree UK, the three places where Nortel has filed for bankruptcy happen to be the countries that don't have the preferred status protections.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, I just want to, I know you're looking at the clock. We do have approval. The Fisheries Committee is scheduled for 11, but they've agreed to give us a few more minutes to finish this round. So we'll have Mr. Mulcair for 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wish to thank everyone who is here this morning and who have put a human face on this drama.
To watch what's happening to the individuals, but also to realize, as the CEO of Nortel pointed out, that they approached the Canadian government to try to find a solution that would avoid the breakup and destruction of Nortel, which has generated so much wealth and growth and richness and resources well beyond its own walls in the Canadian economy and in the intellectual community. The breakup of Nortel is the arrow of the 21st century. It's one of those colossal mistakes that get made, and I was really distressed to find out that the door had been slammed on an attempt to come to a solution that would have allowed Nortel to continue as a going concern, as opposed to breaking it up. Mr. Lyons, thank you for pointing out something that a lot of people don't think about, and that is that pensions and the money that goes into pension is simply foregone income. It's your money, but you're saying, well, I'm putting it there. It doesn't belong to the employer, it doesn't belong to the employee. It's yours for later use, and you have to be able to call on it. There's another issue that the chairman referred to, and it's worth mentioning now because of the size and the scope of the changes that Nortel has gone through, the variations, every possible perverse effect has been amplified, magnified. So, for example, the issue of the phantom income, for people who haven't followed the issue, that's going to be dealt with in September, but a lot of Nortel employees bought stock, there was a deemed disposition at a higher price, money that they never saw. They're being taxed on it, and like they say at the train stations, careful, one train can hide another. Once you think that that one's gone, on bankruptcy there's a further deemed disposition and people are going to get hit again. On the severance issue, if you had your severance, you wouldn't be going on EI. You'd be able to live off your severance for that amount of time and have EI at the end if need be. Here, people will be immediately going on EI, choice of the government, when they turn down Mr. Zafrowski's proposition, and there'll be a clawback of that if and when you get even 22 cents on the dollar. It's every possible perverse effect of the system amplified. Mrs. Urquhart, I wanted to ask you something. Is it your view that if we gave preferred status to severance and pension benefits over bondholders and unsecured suppliers, that it would have been an incentive to seek to maintain it as an ongoing concern as opposed to going into liquidation? Is that your view?
I would say that if you did an emergency amendment in this case, I guess I would be shocked to see that the debt holders wouldn't want to go to the ongoing concern plan, because if all of the $4 billion of that's my estimate of deficits, whatever it is, $3 to $4 billion, that the proceeds of the sales will not leave anything for the debt holders. And so they would rather have an ongoing concern, which would cause the pension deficits to not be a crystallized deficit and live for another day, so that even if the special contributions that cannot be borne today are sacrificed for an extended period of time until a better day, that they would have better recoveries in the future than to take sale proceeds now where they are pro rata on a basis of it looks like approximately 50-50 in the world, worse in Canada with the employment-related claims.
And thank you for that explanation, and we tend to agree with you, and that's the reason to come back to it. And Mr. Sproul correctly pointed out that there was an NDP motion that was adopted unanimously just a couple of days ago in the House that calls, for example, for the people at the CPPI Investment Board to give back the millions of dollars of bonuses that they paid themselves. I think that there's a little bit of a theme developing there. The other thing, of course, that it would do is fix this type of problem. There's nothing to stop us from doing it. But it would seem that from the meetings that were described, the government seemed to be anxious to see Nortel go into liquidation as opposed to doing everything it could to keep it vital and keep it as a going concern. And that, for us, is extremely distressing information. Also, the reference to the Income Tax Act is correct. We've looked at this issue in this committee, and it's part of what has to be fixed. Obviously, when times are good, you have to be able to top up more, and that limitation shouldn't be where it is right now. Your explanation was completely right. There's another strange thing. The head of the Canada Revenue Agency was in here just a few short weeks ago, and we asked how it was that the employees of JDS Uniphase, who had a very special remission with regard to their phantom income, How come that deal was not available to Nortel employees? And we asked them if he had ever seen that before, that a remission order in a very specific case was not generalized to others. And he said in the 90-year history of the Canada Revenue Agency, no one had ever seen that. And he had never seen it. That's from the head of the agency. The only difference between the two is that every single employee of JDS Uniphase, and I'm very glad for them that they got the remission, they all happen to be in Minister Lund's riding. And that's the only thing that they seem to have going for them. So let's hope that the fact that a lot of the retirees live in some of the ridings, especially of those who are from the Ottawa area, might make them a little bit more amenable than the ministers that were mentioned, Minister Flaherty and the Minister of Industry, Mr. Clement, and the Prime Minister. But again, thank you for putting such a human face on this issue for us and explaining your individual situations, especially with the employees on disability. And I would love it if you could provide us, Mr. Clooney, with the, you gave us a very specific bit of information with regard to documents that referred to Sun Life and a deduction. Perhaps you could supply that to the clerk of the committee so we can actually see it. It's incredible. And I'm not saying that I don't believe you. I'm just saying that the situation itself, that people would be led to believe that they have an insurance, that they find out that it doesn't even exist, that they're general creditors. In ending, Mr. Speaker, thank you for protecting our time. It's very appreciated, sincerely. And I wanted to say to all the people who were not able to make it in today, a lot of people are following us online, a lot of people are outside Parliament. We're going to do everything we can to help you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. Mr. Clooney, did you want to comment briefly? If you do want to provide that to the clerk, I will ensure all members of the committee get it.
I provided to Jean-Francois.
Oh, you did? Okay.
No, I provide the additional information to him.
Oh, yes, please.
We'll provide it within the next 48 hours.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you all for your presentations, for your responses to our questions. I want to thank you so much because it's an issue of obviously very serious concern to you, but you did so very respectfully, and I sincerely appreciate that. In terms of logistics, we tried to do 4 meetings in one. It was a very challenging thing to do, but obviously there will be an ongoing dialogue about this issue. There was a request made for Mr. Zafrowski to do just a final comment. Mr. Zafrowski, we're pushing a committee back, so we have about, say, 3 minutes. If you just want to...
I actually try to keep it even shorter. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity again. This is very much the human face which has made the decision so difficult and agonizing. When we filed in January, that decision was not made until January 13th. I do have a family, 3 sons. What I keep telling them is that if you want to accomplish something significant, you have to give it everything you have. We certainly did that. All this to say, just because you do does not guarantee success. It was phase 1. I can give assurances to all the employees, former employees, pensioners. They're doing exactly the same level. They're giving everything you have, asking our customers, suppliers, employees to work with us through this process, to optimize within the current constraints, to optimize the values for the liabilities which Nortel has to you. That's a major imperative. There's the only reason I'm going through this process. So you have my personal commitment to that. I've expressed it to the employees on an ongoing basis. And I cannot express in any more ways that the level of empathy and the level of respect I have for 100+ years of Nortel coming here and to say we give everything we had. It's a different game plan, but still many of the assets of the company are superb. We try to optimize it for the benefit of all, and very specifically employees and stakeholders. And Mr. Day can attest to lots of discussions which we have internally. A couple of very specific questions on the LTD. We have 409 people. We're continuing those payments. We're looking for options to continue those without any guarantees. So I did have a very specific update on that. A very quick comment on pension. We did stop the pension plan at Nortel in 2006. For many large companies, they go through different stages. To have 25,000 people paying for 100,000 plus pensioners, it's a very, very significant risk. What we had changed to is the defined contributions as opposed to defined benefits. Anyways, simply, I do believe that it's a smart way to be looking at managing pension assets for employees. And the last thing, there was a comment that we did not make an accurate statement on priorities. I would just like to ask Mr. Day to to comment on $200 million.
Very briefly. All the creditors, when we filed, all the creditors were unsecured. As part of the cash constraints that Canada was facing, there had to be money borrowed from the U.S., and in order to protect the U.S. estate, the judge ordered certain charges to protect that money, and $75 million has been borrowed under that facility.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you for that. I hope this dialogue does continue. Members, our final item of business, I understand there's unanimous consent to adopt Mr. McCallum's motion. Am I correct in that? Monsieur Carrier?
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, I just want to mention that we had presented a similar motion to set aside 1 hour to hear from self-employed technology workers. And in fact, the parliamentary secretary had committed to arranging a meeting with the Minister of Finance. So we do agree with Mr. McCallum's motion, but we do hope that it does include hearings with technology workers who are experiencing the similar problem.
Bush Fisheries back. I thought there was unanimous consent. Is there unanimous consent for this motion? If there isn't, we won't pass it.
Mr. Chair, I also want to add on to what Mr. Carrier was saying. When this motion was presented, we talked about the very specific case, and we had sought a meeting with the minister.
Yes? Okay, thank you. Thank you all, colleagues. Thank you all for coming in. Meeting adjourned.